My name is Steve Anders. I'm a sergeant with the Bedford County Sheriff's Office. I've been here since 2008, assigned full-time to the Southern Virginia Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. So the mission of the task force is to go out and weave a seamless web of protection around our children. Because once a child's innocence is lost, it can't be replaced. So we're out there in a law enforcement capacity doing proactive investigations, reactive investigations, educational awareness and programs, public presentations, everything we can do to combat the problem of online child sex exploitation, including trafficking. The problem of human trafficking, it's a local problem, it's a national problem, it's an international problem. A lot of people have this misconception that it's a big city issue or it's people from other countries being brought here, and that happens. Human trafficking, whether it's sexual exploitation or labor exploitation, it happens in the small communities, it happens in the rural areas, it happens in cities like Lynchburg all the time. There's numerous cases we could talk about. Here locally, there was an incident about a year or so ago where young women that were associated with known local gangs were recruiting high school aged girls to become prostitutes. They were then working out of brothels, out of private residences in the Lynchburg area and the surrounding counties. And the gangs collected all the money that these high school girls were earning through the prostitution, and they controlled who, where, and when the girls worked. There was another incident where a police officer who was undercover observed a young woman looking at a Backpage ad out at a public restaurant, and they located that ad and realized it was her. She was checking her own ads. And so they set up a date and met her and found out that she had been trafficked as a child from Russia. And when she was able to make it overseas here to the US, she ended up getting entangled with a group of men in a nearby city that were locking her and several other women up in a residence and prostituting them out. And she was able to escape, but she only knew sex trafficking because that's what had been happening to her since she was a child. So she was trying to support herself. And then before Backpage and other sites like that had been taken down because of Foster and Sestra, when we could do the proactive investigations that way, we also recovered young women that were being trafficked from outside of Virginia being brought into Virginia in the Lynchburg area. Because you have to remember in this area, we are right on 460 that goes east to west from 81 to 95. And then 29 going north and south from Charlotte to Washington, D.C. So it's a four-way hub between major roadways, and traffickers, whether it's drugs, people, what have you, are coming through Lynchburg all the time. Traffickers will target anybody that they think they can manipulate. Doesn't matter whether they're coming from a poverty-stricken area or an affluent, well-to-do area. Unfortunately, our society has almost glamorized pimping and in that lifestyle, looking at popular shows that have that word in it as the title. And there are, in certain musical genres, it's almost glorified. So kids sort of get programmed into accepting this as a legitimate lifestyle. And in those affluent communities where the kids may be involved, they may not even be trafficked so much out of against their will. They're still being trafficked because they're under 18 and it's a commercial sex act, but they're still living at home with their parents and their parents have no idea what's going on. All the way down to you do have those in the poverty-stricken areas that are being trafficked because they're runaways. Their family could be trafficking them in exchange for rent or drugs. Any number of things could be happening. A runaway could be trafficked simply because they're exchanging that sex act for food or shelter for a night. Anything of value, doesn't have to be money. So it doesn't discriminate. It can be anybody and everybody could become a victim of trafficking. So the role of the internet when it comes to sex trafficking is that it now opens up the marketplace. Whereas before it used to be very localized, and if you were looking for a prostituted woman or even young man or what have you, you had to go look for them. They were walking the street or they were in certain neighborhoods and you had to identify them. There was a lot of risk involved with that. Now anybody could post any sort of ad online and you can post in multiple cities. Traffickers often will take their victims, and it's almost like an old circuit preacher from the 1800s. They'll go from one city to the next over a couple days and then just do a loop and come back through. So they're constantly posting ads online in different forums to advertise who they have. and then they communicate via social media, they communicate via text message, anything like that. So it's a lot easier to access and find what you're looking for, and they're more comfortable because they feel they have a higher level of anonymity. You know, very rarely now is it the prostituted victim that is walking a street. They're waiting in a hotel room, and they're just waiting for the buyers to show up, pay for it, do the deed, and then they're gone, and the next one comes in. The challenges that we face in law enforcement working these type of investigations, one, a lot of times the victims aren't cooperative. They don't disclose what's happening to them. That could be because of the control that the traffickers have over them, the abuse, it could be the drug addiction, it could be fear of retaliation against their family or loved ones, or they may be so brainwashed that they just believe this is their lifestyle and they're okay with it. It's also hard, especially with some of the newer laws that have gotten rid of websites like Backpage and some of the advertising that was on Craigslist, to name a few, that it's now driving it further underground. So it's harder for law enforcement to locate and crack those rings and infiltrate them to find out where they're at, because they're getting smarter and more careful on how they contact potential buyers, and because they know we're out there looking for them. Educating children and parents and just society as a whole is probably the most effective tool at combating this. One of the biggest hurdles to this is parents thinking it can't happen to my child. It can't happen to me. My child would never do that. And when a parent has that mindset, they're not paying attention to the warning signs that are there. They're not paying attention to the change in personality or this other stuff. They'll go into denial and they'll convince themselves that it's not serious, and then next thing you know, your kid's gone. Kids, because our society glamorizes and over-sexualizes everything, as I mentioned earlier, they sometimes think this is a cool lifestyle because it is popularized in certain musical genres, lifestyles. It's just looked as cool and powerful, and a lot of money is involved in it. So they have this idea that it's okay. They may get exposed to pornography at a young age online. Viewing that content programs them over years before mom and dad even have the idea that, oh, we need to start having these conversations. So their whole idea of what a healthy sexual relationship is skewed and perverted, and that carries over into the real world. It's just knowing, though, that we have made a difference because we've educated kids. There's a young girl here in Virginia that she went to a presentation that I did for their youth group one year. Her leader called me back about 2 years after and said, hey, I'm sending you a link to a news article. This young girl had been texting with someone online that she had no idea who it was, and he started to kind of creep her out through what they were texting about, so she told him to stop. I don't want to communicate with you anymore. He persisted, so she told her parents, who notified local law enforcement. They then assumed her online identity, continued to communicate with this guy as her, and they set up a meeting. He traveled to meet what he thought was going to be this young 14-year-old girl. And when he arrived at the hotel, it was law enforcement. They took him into custody. And during the interview, he had admitted that he was an illegal immigrant and that he was planning to either take her back to his home country, smuggle her back, and then sell her to a cartel as a sex slave, or he was going to rape her and kill her. And just, it made all the presentations I've done wondering, have I made an impact? It made it worth that time, knowing that at least one kid heard the message and they picked up on the warning signs and knew what was happening to them. They recognized the grooming, and they went and told their parents, and we were able to get a bad guy off the streets.